My name's Walker Wells. I'm with Global Green. I'm the moderator for this panel, the panel chair, I think I'm called, yes. The organization I work for, Global Green, national nonprofit focused on urban sustainability, headquartered in Southern California. Work all over the country, doing a range of things on green building and neighborhood planning and citywide policy. But I'm not the panelist, I'm the moderator. I do have a few slides to set things up. But here's who else that we have with us today. Stuart's not here. He has a flu, so unfortunately we don't get the sort of his urban economics background focused on transportation. But what we do have is Tamar Gavrieli, who's going to be, hi Tamar, now we've met, hello. Working across time zones and juggling multiple things. Tamar is from Tel-Aviv, or at least talking about it and talking about a number of interesting things that are happening in that city and in Israel related to sustainable urbanism and placemaking. You're going to go first after me, just so you know. Then we're going to hear from Jason, who's with the City of Los Angeles in the mayor's office as one of these Bloomberg innovation fellows doing innovative things related to adapting the city that we have. Largely through sort of a sensitive strategy towards densification, and he's working with Kevin Daly, who is an architect and also on the faculty at the architecture school here at UCLA. And Kevin's working on the design of one of the two prototypes that Jason's shop is wanting to put out in the world to demonstrate the possible. So we're going to go from super big, me, to like pretty big, to a focused project, to an actual building. So I think we're going to cover how to think about the built environment down to actually how to make things that can, over time, and I think in aggregate, have a transformative effect on the built environment. So now I'd like to get my few slides up here. So what these slides are going to do is try and set the stage just a little bit. And so here we go. We've been making cities for a long time. I don't know, 5,000 years or something. I think we've tried to make them smart in their moment with current technologies. Maybe historically they were sustainable by necessity, that you did need to work with the surroundings and your available resources. This is a painting of the Tower of Babel. So it also shows that for a long time humans have been incredibly arrogant about our intelligence and what we could accomplish. And here we're trying to build a tower up to to talk to God. That story is why there's so many languages in the world, because they want us to not be able to communicate with each other well enough to outsmart God. But buried in this story and Sodom and Gomorrah, et cetera, there's this sense that cities are bad places where nature doesn't exist, and we do human things, and nature is at the outside of our cities. And we are just starting to build this narrative of green urbanism and cities that are interwoven with nature. Now, a lot of that narrative has been around utopia. So here's just a few utopian visions. Ebenezer Howard, Garden Cities of Tomorrow. How to make a utopian suburb outside of London. Le Corbusier, this Ville Radieuse, an idea for the ideal city where we could all live in towers, surrounded by park space, and we could drive around in this new thing called the automobile, and we could avoid public transportation, and we wouldn't have to have carriage houses for horses and all those animals. And this was like the height of modernism and progressive thinking. We've got Frank Lloyd Wright out there thinking about a little more of a suburban ideal, about how we could still maintain open space and place to grow food. So kind of building on this Jeffersonian idea that we could be self-sustained with our little tiny farms. And effectively, that's what your suburban house is, right? A farmhouse on a tiny, tiny farm that's not really enough land to grow anything on, but that's perpetuating this ideal of land ownership in the West. A little more contemporary, Paulo Soleri out with Arco Santi. This idea of, we're going to abandon Phoenix and go find a better place and build a utopian community filled with Waldorf schools and biodynamic gardening, and rammed earth housing and, basic idea, all the cool people will go out there and live in an awesome building and we'll leave that icky city of Phoenix behind. And then bringing us up effectively to modern times, this is an image of Masdar in the Emirates that is our sort of latest cut at urban sustainability. And so it's a little patch surrounded by the extant city that has incorporated all kinds of fantastic things related on sort of traditional Islamic design, as well as different technologies about transit, but about daylight harvesting and movement of air and solar panels. And so we get these examples of either visions or sort of built places that are going to be the utopian ideal. My challenge is that when you look it up, utopia means no place or nowhere. So many of these things are not sort of authentically of a place or have never even been realized. And I'm interested in being somewhere and being place-based and rooted in history and culture. And I think that's the city that we already have, and that's where it's exciting. So this is what we're working on at Global Green, this idea of green urbanism, bringing together nature and city, ecological processes, and the dynamism of urbanism. You can see what we have up there as a definition, a practice of creating communities that are beneficial to people in the environment. We think it's a practice, a thing you do, and when we do it, we ask these 4 questions. Are we increasing natural capital? And if I had more time, I could explain what that means, but all the free stuff that nature gives us. Are we increasing our connection between ourselves and nature, and are we increasing social equity? And are we creating more stable and resilient economies? This is built on this idea of urban ecology. This is a foundational principle, at least for our work, to try and give it some scientific grounding, that ecology of cities as a human-created ecosystem, rather than looking for little pieces of ecosystem in the city, to sort of say, this is an ecosystem, let's think about it like that. Let's apply science, let's bring our smarts to this idea of sustainability so we can answer this question, which is, how do we green out of, the city that's there? So it's Dodger Stadium up there in the top right for you guys. So how do we make it green, equitable, and resilient? And hopefully those are the topics we're going to touch on in this panel. I'm done. Tamar, you're up. Let's get your slides up here.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm actually from Tel Aviv, but I represent here the Jerusalem Institute for Israeli Studies. And we are conducting an urban sustainability project for the last 3 years. I'll try to combine all things to present you a few ideas. Coming from Israel, mostly from the practical side of the planning profession, I would like to start my presentation from the Israeli point of view. I will present challenges and conflicts we face in Israel trying to achieve smart and sustainable built environment. The second part of my presentation, I will share with you some insights from our project in the Jerusalem Institute about public spaces and their potential for enhancing urban sustainability. So, Israel is a very, very small country and a very urban one. Israel's population is growing, and there is a constant need to supply housing and employment solutions for the growing population. And it's a very important fact to present for people who don't know what Israel is. Smart and sustainable urban development is an essential goal for Israel because of that. We can define several conflicts and threats on our sustainable urbanism. You all know very well the unsustainable characteristics of a suburban neighborhood. It's not from Israel, it's from the United States. New housing developments built in the city's outskirts in Israel these days could suffer from suburban characteristics, but in higher density situations like this. Like this one. These are kind of neighborhoods that are now being built in Israel to supply the great demands for housing solution. And this kind of development is not sustainable enough for in the way we look at it. We face a conflict between the need to find housing solutions and the threat of losing our open spaces for building new neighborhoods in the vacant land. Another conflict we face is that in that perspective is between regeneration of existing neighborhoods versus the easier solution of building new neighborhoods. Regeneration can take different directions, and the considerations should be local, and there are very different considerations. This is one option, demolition of old housing stock and build new neighborhood. But on the other hand, we have some very good experience, for example, in the city of Tel Aviv, in policy of adding new stories to existing buildings without demolition, bringing through this intervention new population, money for building renovation, and sustainable regeneration. So there are big conflicts in terms of how to create our regeneration and our supply. These are very long processes. What you can see here takes a long time, but gives a very good result for the city. So there is a conflict between our need to enlarge the supply and of this kind of solutions. We are concerned by equal distribution of population nationwide and within our cities. And we suffer, as many other cities, from traffic congestion and the lack of a good enough system for public transportation. This is a crucial threat, and we are working on that. On the other hand, I want to be very optimistic. There are many strengths and opportunities in Israel. The Israeli society is a young society, a very dynamic and ready to adopt new ideas and lifestyles. We have to take advantage of these characteristics and create policy for sustainable environment for our cities. We in the Jerusalem Institute for Israel Studies are looking for tools to make our cities more suitable for sustainable lifestyle within our constraints, limitations, and national goals. Our urban sustainability project assumes that behavioral changes are the key factor in achieving more sustainable world. We are looking for behavioral tools for consumption reduction and for living better life within our boundaries. We are not dealing only with technologies, we are thinking about the human part of sustainable lifestyle. New paradigms of using open spaces are essential to move to that direction. We look for ways to use tools like sharing, community capacity building, and behavioral change in order to achieve that. And I would like to concentrate now on the issues of the open spaces and what we should do with open spaces in order to make our cities more sustainable. I would like to present a few principles. You can see them and go into each of them in a few examples. We have to see the city as a network. We have to have good accessibility. Flexibility is one of the main issues. You heard about it in the first part of the day, because nothing today is final and everything has to be reversible. And this is very hard when you are talking about building the city. Efficiency is a very important issue. I'll talk about it. Mixture and diversity and sharing. Community engagement has to be everywhere. And behavioral change is something that we have to take into consideration when we are talking about a change. And all this has to be in a holistic approach, because the city is a very complicated organ and things are related to each other. I'll try to touch upon each of these issues. And my examples will be some from Israel, from Tel Aviv, from other places in the world. The case study of planning of the young Tel Aviv during the 20s to 40s of the last century, if somebody knows the Patrick Geddes, he's an English planner who was planning the first neighborhoods of Tel Aviv. It was a very good example for the concept of a mixed land use and urban vivid streets. The basic structure of the city was based on its strict street network. The street is an integral part of the city public space and is the most accessible and friendly place for everyone. The urban street is the best connection between different parts of the city. There are very good examples of successful streets in the inner city of Tel Aviv. A good mixture of dwelling, CBD functions, and commercial strips create a vivid and attractive city center. This was one of the main reasons, not the only one, but one of the main reasons for the city to become the most attractive place for young people in Israel to live in. Another example from Israel, Yafo Street in Jerusalem, it's the main street of the inner part of the city, went through an extensive regeneration process with the introduction of the light rail. The street is now a pedestrian mall with no private cars access, and it's becoming more and more attractive and good place. The growing use of non-motorized transportation has a great influence on the functioning of the urban fabric. It's very developed already in Tel Aviv, less developed in other cities in Israel, but it's one of the most important tools that we have to go on and develop. Now, I would like to touch about the issue of flexibility. In a very dynamic world, we have to look for ways for adaptation of our public spaces to changing needs, to different users, while keeping principles of sustainable use. We have to be ready for flexibility and quick changes. This is a big challenge because of the difficulty in changing the physical form. And I would like to show you some examples that might give some inspiration to that notion. These are examples for this mixture of public and private use of temporary residence. On the left side, you can see a gathering place in Holland, and on the right side, you can see some kind of temporary housing on a public lot in China. And it shows the idea of temporary use, of flexible change. There are other examples. This is from Tel Aviv, an example of a mobile function. It's a mobile library that goes everywhere. This is on the seashore now. It can be everywhere, and it can be good for the users wherever they are. Meanwhile use is a very important tool in big cities or in cities at all when there are changing of needs. And the main challenge is to use these places for different purposes and also on a temporary basis. This is a new example from Jerusalem when an old school became a place for artists. And it might become for another use in the future. The issue here is really flexibility. The next thing is efficiency. We don't have lots of space. In Israel, as a very small country, we have to think very well about how we use our open space. And here you can see some examples of multiple use. This is not for Israel, but there is the bus station that can be a library on the left side. It can, on the right side, you can see a bus station that is a place for playing when you are waiting for the bus. On the left side and down, you can see an electronic store in the public area where you can do your shopping on a virtual way while you are waiting for bus or anything. And on the right side, you can see a parking lot that can be a sport center, a sport place instead of parking. And you can do both on the same round. You can do... you can do in one place many functions as using this public open space to recharge your telephone. And another very important thing, in Israel at least, is how you use your public building, the public buildings. We don't want to see public buildings used only part of the day. For example, kindergartens who are working up to afternoon should be used all day for other purposes for the public. And this is, it's easy to say, it's hard to implement, but there is a lot of effort is done in order to really use our public buildings all day. On the terms of planning, we are facing in Israel now new projects that are trying to be very, very dense. And this is an example of a project that is now under construction, when we have on the same area, on a 2 acres lot, a sports center in the underground, a shopping mall at grade, and then above that you can see a elementary school with its open space on the roof of the mall and the cultural center on the right. So we have 1,200 square meters on 2 acres in the inner city, and it's new. This is a new kind of development. We hope it will work. Another point of view, the mixture and diversity. Things should be interchangeable because of this need to dynamic view. So you can see this is from Bryant Park in New York, when you have places to work and for leisure. The 2 other examples are kind of community centers in Tel Aviv, but these are not the regular community centers. They have also place for work, for places for artists to work. They are very flexible, and they are and ready for change in their uses. And when you're looking inside the buildings, you can see the options of changing the building to be a working place on the left side, and just a gathering place on the right side. When you take the desk and put it up, you can see on the right side. These are all kind of efforts to use the same space in a very, very flexible way. And you can serve planning goals through this concept. For example, to get less place for cars and more place for people. You can see it in New York, in Manhattan, in the Broadway. All the way through Broadway, you can see how places for cars are becoming places for people. And the parking places on the right hand will become just places for people to be. You take the same place and change its goal. Sharing is one of the main ideas that we think would help to get sustainable development. You will hear it, I think, in the next session. And these are 2 examples. The concept of working places that are a combination of work for many people, like WeWork, and the bike sharing that you can have. You can see in many places. In Tel Aviv, we have it for a few years, and it's quite a successful way to use our assets in a sharing way. And one of the main and important things in how we engage the community to be part of our public space life. And on this issue, we have lots of interesting processes that are going on in Israel, especially in Jerusalem and also in Tel Aviv. We have community gardens, like 70 community gardens in Jerusalem that are very, very active. We have a wave of urban agriculture that is starting to come in. We have the roof of community center in Tel Aviv that is devoted to urban agriculture now, and lots of community grassroots activities that has to be adopted by the municipalities in order to make it grow. And the last issue is the design tool as a tool for behavioral change in the public space. There are a few examples here. The middle one is how to attract stairs to be more fun than just regular stairs. And you can see different other ones. On the left side, these are ways to get for bicycles ways. The upper one there is the distance to the sea from different places in Tel Aviv, because Tel Aviv is a coastal city, and this might encourage people to walk to the sea, and they know how far it is. And the right one is a sign to get to the garbage can in Copenhagen. So the design can be a very good tool to change behavior towards sustainable behavior. Another example is how to create the idea of the drivers that there are near a public school in England somewhere. This is kind of a nudge tool that makes you change your behavior without saying don't drive over 50 kilometers per hour. Just the signs, the atmosphere might change your behavior. And I would like to finish with a few words about the holistic perception. All these tools are very different tools and very nice, but as a planner, if you want to get to your strategic goal, you have to look at the whole picture and not only on the different parts of it. And this is an example from Tel Aviv, when the city decided to put a strategic goal to make all the seashore continuous. So this strategic goal made the city do many plans and implement them along the seashore. And today the seashore of Tel Aviv is 13 kilometers. It's all the way down from north to south, has a walking path, bicycle routes, and it's a very nice environment to walk and to bike, and it helps to change the behavior. And as a planner, I can say that a strategic planning that takes all these things into consideration is very important to see how you get the goals. To sum up, sustainable urban public spaces are key elements to achieve good quality of life for the city residents while keeping our planet in its boundaries. Human behavior is a crucial factor in promoting the change. The principles suggested might contribute to achieve those important goals and bring the world to a better future. Thank you.
Thanks, Walker. Thanks, Mara. My name is Jason Neville. I'm on a Bloomberg Philanthropies funded team in the mayor's office called the Innovation Delivery Team. We're one of 14 innovation delivery teams in the US and 2 in Israel, 1 in Tel Aviv and 1 in Jerusalem. The mayor asked our team to look at the issue of inclusive neighborhood revitalization. So how, given all the growth in our city right now, the public investments in rail and parks and schools and housing, can we promote neighborhood revitalization that's inclusive and does not lead to displacement of residents or businesses? So I'm the project manager working on the portfolio of initiatives designed to reduce residential displacement. And one of those initiatives, which is a secondary unit initiative, overlaps nicely with the themes that we've been hearing about today of sustainable urbanism. I'm a planner, my background is in sustainable economic development. So secondary units are legal second units that you can build on single-family zone properties in Los Angeles. Since 2003, we've built about 350 of them, but barriers still remain to building these secondary units. And I'll get to that in a second. Some of the benefits you see up on the screen, bear with me, my one bullety slide. They can be permitted by right me. They don't need conditional use permits. They allow for families to expand or contract, as you'll see in some photos. They can provide rental income to the homeowner, and with no land costs, it can help create naturally affordable housing by creating smaller units that are on existing parcels where there's available space. It uses less resource consumption, and it's sort of a micro infill strategy in our neighborhoods to complement some of the traditional infill development, such as transit-oriented development. It also, I think this is interesting, and I'm not sure if Kevin's planning on talking about it, but fits in with the trajectory of innovative residential architecture and design in Los Angeles, which is really exciting, I think. And I mentioned the naturally affordable housing. I will also mention, since the mayor was here earlier, that secondary units have been identified as a strategy in the city's sustainability plan, as well as our housing element and our homelessness reduction strategy. So I mentioned that there's about 350 secondary units in Los Angeles right now. Here's a few pictures of them. They come in different shapes and sizes. On the top left, you see sort of a classic secondary unit that's been classic in the sense that it's been developed through a lot of research here at UCLA through Dana Cuff and her work at City Lab, the classic backyard home, a detached structure in the backyard. But what a lot of people don't realize is that it can also include second stories over garages. It can include partitioning of an existing large single-family homes, garage conversions, and attached. And by the way, this one on the bottom right, it's not always in the backyard home. Some lots actually have room in the front yard or in the side yard. So there's a map here showing the locations of the 350 or so existing legal secondary units. I should also note, as an aside, there's probably untold tens of thousands of unpermitted secondary units throughout Los Angeles, which is part of the goal. People have asked me, is this an illegal unit legalization program? The answer is no, but if we make it easier for folks to do it legally, then we feel like we will be able to divert those who would be doing it without permits. And there's real, genuine, understandable reasons why people are choosing not to do it legally, and we're trying to meet people where they are to understand how we can make it as easy as possible to build these and reduce barriers to it. So the big takeaway here on their location in Los Angeles is that they're primarily located in parts of the city that have larger lot sizes, 7,500 square feet and more, which is generally in the newer developed parts of town. I'm just going to walk over here for 1 second. There is supposed to be a line, a little dotted line right here. As an Angelino, I hate to use Portland as an example for much, but they keep doing such a great job, unfortunately. Secondary unit in production in Los Angeles, there's about 40 or so being permitted and occupied annually, which this bar graph here shows that that's how many Portland has done historically, until 2009 when they made a series of policy changes and incentives to strengthen the market for secondary units. And that was clearly the inflection point. Now, and this year they are on track to permit more than we have permitted since they became legal in Los Angeles in 2003. So we have looked to them for some inspiration on their secondary unit market strengthening program. Here's an example of the kinds of here's some pictures of secondary units in Los Angeles. No disrespect to any of the people that built those. But here's the quality of design on those that are being built in Portland. And the role of design in helping strengthen the market for secondary units is really, really important, both from a sustainability point of view, but also people in Los Angeles can be fearful, and it's understandable about neighbors building things in their backyard adjacent to them. Great design helps reduce some of that friction that can happen, and I think Kevin will talk a little bit more about that. Secondary units are a housing strategy that's emerging mainly in the West Coast, but throughout the country. San Francisco has been addressing it too. They've done something really great, which is create a user-friendly how-to guide for building secondary units on your property. Here's some examples of that on the screen. It's beautiful. It was designed by architects. We're going to do the same thing here in Los Angeles once we finish our prototyping project. So I'll briefly go through the innovation teams, what we're calling the end-to-end approach. So we have the benefit of being inside the City of Los Angeles government and partnering with the city planning department and building in safety to look at some of these issues and to roll out new business processes and ways of doing things. But we also have the flexibility, because we're funded by Bloomberg Philanthropies, to partner with great architects like Kevin Daly and UCLA City Lab and LA Moss. So reading from left to right, some of the things we're doing for the secondary unit project involve looking at our zoning code changes. I mentioned that it's legal, but there's still some barriers in our zoning code that we're working with our city planning partners to address. We have developed innovative financing mechanisms. We did a focus group with folks that have built these things. 0 of them got a conventional loan to do this, so there's not really a market for these things. They're financing it through cash or through home equity lines of credit. So for our prototyping project, which I'll get to in a quick second, we have partnered with Genesis LA, a community development financial institution, to provide construction loans. We're helping improve some of the permit tracking to get to the mayor's point about being able to measure your good work. Marketing existing opportunities to homeowners. Another barrier to secondary units is no one knows about it. So by helping people understand that it is possible and here's how to do it in a way that's context sensitive and resource sensitive will be a benefit. This second to last one, incorporating social value. As all of you probably know, we have not only a housing crisis generally, but also an affordable housing crisis, a homelessness crisis, and this is a way to provide naturally affordable housing that can help address the housing question broadly, but also these specific needs. And then the last thing that I have to say I'm most excited about is this prototyping project. We have partnered with architecture firms and design organizations, Kevin Daly Architects, UCLA City Lab, and on a separate second project, LA Moss, to design and construct 2 prototype secondary units that will demonstrate design excellence, sustainable design, and affordability to be that demonstration project that shows people how a thoughtful secondary unit can contribute to the site, the neighborhood, and the city as well. Thank you very much.
Next up, Kevin Daly. Kevin Daly Architects, also with City Lab. Thank you for mentioning that. And I think that's part of how this panel came together, was through Dana Cuff, who works with Kevin and others out of the architecture on this sort of think, do tank called City Lab. So I'm happy to have them represented, and happy to have Kevin here to, I think, walk us through some of the details of the prototype. And I think we did give you a segue, if you want to give us a little bit of a primer on all of this innovation that did happen in residential architecture in LA with the case study houses. I know one of your first slides is one of those, so we need to get that up here.
So, well, let's just talk about the slides a little bit. I guess I want to talk about a very limited but an important part of sustainable cities, which is how we inhabit and how we use urban space, and I think the building part of it is really critical. There are obviously a million ways of counting stuff like this, but building things in the environment, is generally seen as contributing, 40% or so of the carbon emissions that we deal with. And I think many of us architects moved to LA long after this building was built. This has always been kind of an icon, the Stahl House, kind of memorialized in this beautiful photograph by Julius Schulman. I think I moved here, in part to work for Frank Gehry and the group of architects that really were kind of taught by these architects, but started in a different path. This period of modernism, the kind of case study period, I think was, there was kind of this utopian sense that, that in fact there was a moment when architects imagined that the city and buildings would kind of align themselves. That there was a way for all the joists and all the beams to kind of align with the city grid below, and somehow we'd kind of be able to control and manage the environment. I think, in fact, Los Angeles, as you kind of live here and grow up here, you have to confront a different kind of conventional wisdom. And that one is one, where there's a certain type of, I don't know, kind of urban design scolding. And you go, visit your colleagues at other schools on the East Coast, and there's, you say you're from Los Angeles, and there's a little bit of eye rolling, and that's not a real city. And I think, I think as we've grown up in a city that's kind of extensive and limitless, and really, to be honest, kind of poorly built and kind of extensively built, that there's also this sense that Angelenos are kind of profligate and lazy or too laid back to really care about stuff and plan their city properly, and we're not like Portland, and we don't have those values. I suspect there's kind of a long German word for the sense that you have, guiltily, that maybe you were right all along. And so you kind of read the dieting guidelines come out, and you're not supposed to eat fat. You ate a little butter all along, and then it kind of goes on for years and years, and you're kind of shamed for what you ate, and then it turns out you're supposed to eat butter. It's actually the carbs that were killing you all along.
Let's just is there a long German word for existential guilt?
Ben Schott will make one up if there isn't. So,
I know
but
you speak German.
so anyway, I think my sense is that, along with maybe the Los Angeles kind of the sense of the dystopic in Los Angeles, there's also been one of dismissiveness. And my feeling is that, that this research initiative that City Lab has taken on of kind of reimagining the city and reexamining the city through the Backyard House Project, and Jason and the innovation team are really important parts of this, challenges that conventional wisdom and gives us an opportunity to rethink and kind of turn that on its head, because I think what their position would be that what we've done is kind of safeguard this incredibly vast network of distributed open space throughout the city in 500,000 R1 lots. Basically, we've made a land bank that now can be a resource for ways to reconsider the density of the city and how we build and how we use it. And that's really the one thing that cities just cannot make more of. You just can't make more open space. And I think this is really, more than anything, a way of saying, all right, for 50 years, we let the cars park there, and we had lawn, and we brought water all the way from Northern California, and then we opened the faucet and poured it on our lawn. And this is our chance to rethink all those ideas and rethink them in a way that, that allows us to build new kinds of buildings. And here at UCLA, in the architecture school, which City Lab is part of, we want to do that in a way that also kind of steers a little bit away from conventional kinds of construction. So we feel like in this reconsideration of the city and reconsideration of how we've allocated space in the city, we also want to rethink how we recapture that space. So here's a very light kind of building, day and night. It's a kind of building that we imagine could be built, that's flexible enough and scalable enough, and to use kind of architectural term, parametric enough to be able to adjust in size and scale to a lot of different sites. Because as you go from Pacoima to Pacific Palisades, not only do you kind of cover during the summer a 4-degree temperature differential, but there are all kinds of other sorts of circumstances that allow us to consider these as very highly kind of customizable new buildings. What we're imagining is a very, in this particular prototype, a very light kind of frame that really just is almost like a tent. It has to have the environmental performance to make it so it's a conditionable space. But just within that, kind of enough of a canopy to facilitate a naturally ventilated kind of building, one that has kind of an intelligent skin. So this is a building that's made of two fabrics, slightly translucent fabrics, separated by a series of spacers. And then there's a vacuum that's applied between those two fabrics. And that creates enough of an environmental barrier so you can start to condition the space. But that kind of spacer also helps control light and control sun as it comes in. It can incorporate lighting. And so really what we want to do is kind of focus on the skin and the envelope and the sort of environmental kind of characteristics of the building. But more than that, I think even kind of going back before the case study program to theorists like Buckminster Fuller, who kind of introduced this idea, ma'am, do you know how much your house weighs? We feel like it's time to reconsider that, not just purely in terms of an engineering performance, but because engaging the sort of pure sort of material intensity of buildings is the only way we're going to make significant environmental improvements to the way we build. So we feel like architects ought to know how much things cost per square foot. Homeowners, everyone knows that, but how much do they weigh? And so what we've tried to do is configure a building that would allow us to eliminate concrete, first of all, the biggest generator of carbon dioxide in the construction process, by using a raised floor, a very simple framing system, and a very smart envelope. What we've got is a building that weighs about 1/10 of a conventional building. And we had some engineering students at Stanford in their environmental program do an analysis of that. And as you start reducing the weight of materials and the weight of construction by an order of magnitude, 10%, you start getting multiple orders of magnitude in savings in wintertime smog production and all the other things that go along with making the materials that we need to use to build buildings. So I think that's part of our goal as we kind of move forward in the sort of multiple shapes, configurations, and technologies and strategies that will go into this kind of building. We really want to make sure that we're also kind of focusing on the sort of material intensity and kind of, so here's a little prototype that was built here on campus just last year in the courtyard of the Broad. A team of students from the master's program. You may be seeing something like this around now. The photographer stopped these students and were asking whether about their clothes. And I think there's a tradition in some of the boarding schools in South Korea to wear your high school uniform when you graduate. So that's what these guys were doing at this time last year. But for us, let's see if this is going to play. I think, along with the idea of kind of reconsidering, the sort of ideas of lightness and recyclability and flexibility, we really want to make sure that as architects, we're also engaging, fully the idea that we should be doing things differently. And my feeling is that if a team of extremely motivated and well-intentioned but totally unskilled architecture graduate students can do something like this in less than 10 weeks, once we open this kind of challenge to the kind of creative community at large, we can really do a lot. So thank you very much.
Very shortly, I'll take some questions from the audience, and there should be some microphones floating around. A few rules, no speeches, and get to the question quickly so we can hear from as many people as possible. I wanted to just go back to the panelists on two things that came up. So one is this topic of flexibility, and then the other one was about behavior. So I thought we might start with sort of the behavior and the people part of all this, partly because apparently if Jane Jacobs was still alive, she'd be 100 years old.
Tamar, you
this
talked
year.
about the
So there's lots to
behavior
talk
change
about.
and
100 years
the
of
people
change.
part.
So-
I think there's certainly a people part to being able to have a second unit that your mom or dad or children in different stages of life could live there. But maybe just, Tamar, just talk a little bit more about the behavior. Like, how do we get people to want to be part of this sustainability thing? And make sure you speak into the microphone.
Yes, behavior is really the issue that we try to inquire during our last project in the Jerusalem Institute, because our assumption was that the world will not come to a more sustainable situation without a behavioral change, because all the technologies and all the recycling methods, etc., didn't make enough change, and we see it. So the emphasis for our notion has to be on the side of the behavioral, on sociology, on the understanding of the human behavior in the city. And we see that there are lots of potential of changing behavior in the city, and our belief is that changing of behavior might be much better for the well-being of the people, not only for the world, on the overall view.
For
like people in the city, when they can walk very easily from place to place, when they can go very easily get very easily from where they live to where they work, when the land use are mixed and the city is compact. They get much better life, and the lifestyle is better. And this is a changing of behavior. Another thing is the issue of sharing.
Right.
Sharing of...
Let's stop there, and I'll get
Okay.
I just have a very limited amount of time to work with.
Okay.
So let's bring those up. So, does this flexible design of a house, reuse of this land bank, enable some other kind of sharing of space in families, some flexibility in how we think about how we use the single-family house? Like, is that in the architecture as well as the design?
Well, I think this is something that Jason and I have talked about a lot. That
Get the mic a little closer.
that in fact, everybody who's a homeowner has a narrative that makes sense for something like this. They may not be the same. And whether it's because you need somebody to go live with a parent who's getting older, or you've got an older kid moving back to go to graduate school, there's a million different narratives. I think part of that, and that's what really conjoins this idea about both, about use and flexibility. Our feeling also is that kind of ties into this idea of reversibility and recyclability, because we don't want those very particular narratives that might serve a particular, group of people to dominate, to kind of be persistent for 30 years. And I think the kind of reversibility of these kinds of strategies is important as the kind of implementation of them.
Yeah, very interesting. Jason, anything to add? Planner, you're going to add these secondary units. Do we get a different neighborhood and a different behavioral characteristic in a neighborhood over time?
Well, depending on your point of view, that's either a desirable thing or a scary thing.
Yeah.
There's a lot of tradition in Los Angeles of protection of the coveted single-family neighborhood. Although if you look historically at Los Angeles neighborhoods, they were generally 2-unit neighborhoods for a long time, and it was only in the 1970s when we downzone them to R1. But I'm really glad Maura was talking about flexibility. When I joined this team and we were looking at what to do about residential displacement, my first reaction as a redevelopment planner guy was, oh, well, let's look at affordable housing finance. Let's look at public ownership of buildings. Let's look at master leases. And when we found out about the secondary unit work that was being cultivated through City Lab, it jumped out at me for two reasons. One is, when we were doing our initial research, we got a challenge from someone we were interviewing in the initial research. He said, if you can figure out how to deliver a unit of housing in Los Angeles for less than $300,000, you'll have found something really significant. And at the time he said that, I didn't even think that was possible. I kind of laughed it off. But when we discovered the secondary unit backyard home concept, we realized that this is the answer to that really daring question. And as we got into it, initially it was looking at just a second unit as an addition. But when we learned that in Los Angeles you can actually partition an existing single-family home into 2 units, it gets to some of the things that Maura and others are talking about. Flexibility is actually growing families and aging in place and multi-generational family. But also, if you've got that underused space in large homes, you can partition it and make 2 units out of it. So it's both family expansion and also family contraction. There's a lot of flexibility there.